You're listening to Through Help and Back. Through Help and Back is a podcast focused on mental health, addiction, treatment, recovery, and all things related to personal improvement and wellness. Don't worry, we're not here to talk about problems without solutions, and we're definitely not here to talk about struggles without success. So come with your problems, leave with our solutions. If you have turned on the radio or turned on the TV in the last couple years, you know that obviously issues of diversity and race and inclusion, and on the positive and the negative side of that have sort of dominated the news for the past couple years. Awareness as an all-time high, and the conversations around these topics are happening daily. So we found, and luckily she found some time for us, an expert in race-based trauma, somebody who works and teaches on providing people with mental health first aid on a daily basis. She is the owner of Ascend Counseling, and she is a licensed therapist in the state of North Carolina, which is one of my favorite places on the planet. So we're very happy to have her, Miss Alicia Freeman. Welcome to the show. How are you today?
Thank you. I'm just so excited to have time to share space with you and have conversation and share on some important topics.
Definitely. And that concept of time, we talk about this almost every episode, but the helpers in the world who are doing therapy and psychiatry and social work and all the different forms of counseling, time is definitely the most valuable asset in very short supply. And you're doing a lot of things. So thank you so much for making time for us. Do you want to talk a little bit about growing up and what kind of had you thinking about becoming a helper and what got you into this field in the first place? Like what drew you to all this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am Waccamaw Siouan, which is one of the state recognized tribes in North Carolina. So I grew up in a predominantly Native American community. And I would say that, of course, was my first experience with mental health and substance use challenges. And with us being so rural, like the closest city was Wilmington, which is still like at least 35 minutes away and still very small. Like, is that a city? Is that a town? Whatever you want to call it. But so access was very limited. And just also knowing like culturally, we had a lot of natural healing practices and protective factors that we have lost through historical trauma and, over time. So our community really struggled and was challenged with untreated and undiagnosed mental health and substance use challenges. And I was always this curious, inquisitive kid, too smart for my own good. So I wanted to understand what this is that I'm observing and why are people interacting this way and how do you help them? So yeah, that's exactly what drove me down this path of a helping profession and specifically in mental health and substance use.
And it's a really important concept about that access, right? So the Kaiser Family Foundation does a lot of great work in terms of studying underprivileged and disadvantaged populations. And they talk about the access to behavioral health or mental health services. And it was some crazy number, like, 70% of the population has to travel over 40 minutes to get to a psychiatrist, to get to a licensed provider. And people really don't think about that, right? Because we kind of get focused on the cities or the towns. In the case of Wilmington, whatever that is, it's a beautiful place. I've been there a couple times, so it's nice either way. But it is, I would doubt that Wilmington has enough for itself, much less all the surrounding communities that are pouring into Wilmington for help. So that's such an interesting point about access. Also interesting talking about Native American populations. So I want to talk about that a little bit and what it was like growing up in that community, because when we talk about issues around race, obviously it's Black, it's white, Hispanic, it's Asian, but in our nation's history, and currently in our nation, I think the Native American population has really gotten lost in the shuffle and lost in the conversation. So give us a little insight into what that community was like and how it was growing up, in that community.
So I did not realize a lot of this until I actually moved out of the community, but it is the truest, purest form of community that I have ever experienced. Like everybody knows everybody. Most of us are related. And even if we're not, you're still my cousin. And so that sense of belonging when you live in a community with people who look like you, sound like you. I know, this Southern accent, or so they say. Well, I don't have to explain who I am or what I look like. That sense of belonging is so valuable, and I don't think I realized that or cherished that to until I actually left, which it did help me to build community outside of there because I know what it's like. I know what that looks like. And even though there were always challenges, which I think a lot related to access, a lot related just to historical trauma and things that ancestrally have been passed down. I think beyond that, you could still count on your community to show up for you. Like, let's say someone in the community had cancer. We're going to have a plate sale. We're going to have a car wash. Like, we're going to do things and fundraise. We're going to go sit with them. We're going to bring meals. And that level of close knit community is just pretty rare since I've left. I'm finding that.
Yeah, no, and I think the world at large is struggling with a real sense of disconnection from each other, and I hear that from a lot of people where that sense of community is gone kind of everywhere, and then to get that insight into sort of older ways and a community that may feel completely disconnected from a larger sense of society, but within that community, it's the highest level of connection that you've experienced. That's interesting insight because from the outside looking in, it feels like it may be a very different experience than inside out. You felt actually more connected than ever when you're doing part of that. When you first started getting into your studies and things like that, I know there's social work and counseling and sort of the general curriculum they take us all through and the master's programs and things like that. How did your early lived experience and coming from that community kind of inform your learning as you were learning how to be a therapist and how to be a helper? Certainly that had to play a role. So how did that inform what you were being taught?
Well, I think, restorative justice practices really spoke to me and the ideal of rehabilitation because it is very much rooted in Indigenous practices. So I was able to find a connection immediately with that. And so my degree is actually rehabilitation counseling. And then I have a certificate in substance abuse counseling.
Gotcha.
And that was more so because that was the add-on, and it was something that I was interested in because I had observed substance use, and I wanted to understand, like, why would someone choose this coping strategy over, you know, going and dancing at a powwow, or even if they're doing both, like, how can we raise up more of those healthy coping strategies and understand what that unhealthy thing is actually doing, or.
Did you see a lot of that growing up? Because that's the statistics tell us one thing about Native American populations and addiction, and especially substances of abuse. Was that present for you? Did you see a lot of that?
I would say it was present. Definitely alcohol use and abuse, and then even other illicit substances. However, I think over time that has gotten even worse. Just the new drugs, the fentanyl, the opioids, and having access to like, my back is hurting, well, go take one of my muscle relaxers or my pain pills, not having the awareness of how, addictive those things are and harmful. Kind of just trying to self-medicate in a way could also be kind of how some of those things got started.
I spent a long time working in addiction populations with groups in Texas and in Indiana when I first started out. And I would get so furious, just sort of personally, as I would work with people about how readily available all of these substances are. Right. So my days of that are long behind me. College has been over for a long time. Right. So I don't exist in that world. But I could walk right out the front door here of the studio, and within 5 minutes, I know without a doubt I could have access to that. So when we start our conversation talking about how access to help is so limited, but access to all these dangerous substances is so easy. I just have to admit, I used to get really angry at that idea. I felt like people were being set up to fail. And yes, they have to make an individual choice, but damn, there's so much of that out there, and it's so dangerous, and it's killing people. I mean, I don't know. It creates a great sense of frustration with me. So
Absolutely, and I think, even times like I can see how a positive thing and a way that we show love and build community is around food. Well, sometimes, alcohol is a part of that as well, and that's one thing to have that social, but we know just through education that there's standard drink sizes and there's, you know, uh, a binge amount of drinking, and those are things that I did not know until I went through this program, and as I went through my education, I was like, "Oh, so, like, the use that I've seen and known and even experimented with is not normal per se, like, according to this textbook and also according to health outcomes and what it's doing to our bodies."
to have the marketing power that these alcohol companies have behind them, because like you said, it's connected with food and family and fun and connection, but then you've got one of the most dangerous substances that we've ever come up with. If you throw in liver disease, the access to the alcohol, just the overdoses that way, detox from alcohol, that can kill people if they've been using for a long time. You have to be medically detoxed. And then the deaths of despair, how alcohol contributes to depression and isolation and increase those negative symptoms. I mean, you've got a substance that has killed, more people than you could even think or imagine. And yet kickoffs at noon, I got to get a beer. We're going to have some fun. It's part of football Sunday. It's part of the tailgating. It's part of the family gatherings. A real insidious and almost evil job done to connect that to the really healthy things. When you talk about healthy coping mechanisms, you should want to hang out with your friends. You should want to connect with your family. You should want to share time and food and love and spirituality. But boy, they've wedged that in there as if it's almost like part of the equation, and it's killing people. It's very, very dangerous. I want to back up a little bit. You talked about the issue of restorative justice really caught your attention early on. That is a concept that is, I think, fairly new to a lot of folks, especially where I grew up in the Midwest and things like that. So it may feel sort of basic, but can you walk us through kind of a 101 on what you mean by restorative justice and how you define that and why it spoke to you and inspired you?
So my lens is gonna be a lot from, my culture and then a little bit from restorative
Okay,
justice, and
gotcha,
so I'm gonna
gotcha.
give examples of the way I use it in practice, and so one of those ways is through healing circles or talking circles. We use that interchangeably, but it is very similar to what you might call a listening circle and things that are used for mediation. But when it comes to restorative justice, it's like, okay, harm was done. So, how can we repair that harm? It's not that punishment type of mindset. Like, someone done something wrong, so they need to be punished. It's more someone done something wrong. So, what can repair this? I hate to use the word fix because it may never be like it was, it may never be fixed, but accountability is a part of repair. There may be specific actions that can help with that. But healing circles is something that we can use in our community for substance recovery. We also use it for problem solving. We've used that model in terms of like conflict resolution. And so really the foundation of that is like the circle concept being very rooted in our culture, like that infinity, no beginning, no end, no higher, lower, we're all, kind of equal, this circle of life. And I think that's the major difference is there's not that competition and there's not that agree or disagree. We can accept what's being shared, whether we agree or not. And you will also have the opportunity to share, your thoughts and beliefs. And so it's like this circle of acceptance and non competitiveness an opportunity to share with one another.
A beautiful concept right off the bat. And it's so different than I think, I don't know if I even want to say traditional because those practices existed before some of the practices I'm going to cite. But when you think about the more kind of common approach to that, right? Like somebody does something wrong, lock them up, send them away, right? And the problem is removed from the good people or the society, right? And that's punishment, and that evens the score. In addiction, it's send them away to rehab, right? So sometimes after they've been involved in the legal system, it's like jail or rehab, right? And so I met so many people that came to rehab by themselves saying, well, this is better than jail, so I might as well do my time here. And they're sort of serving time, but in a therapeutic setting, right? And you get your one phone call with your family one day a week and, that kind of stuff, but they're not connected, right? And so what we see is the outcomes are really terrible because when they leave the bubble, when they leave that environment, they're back into their original system and relapse, becomes part of that and that kind of stuff. So it's interesting to me because I wonder how we got such a different understanding, right? Your community is embracing the problem and bringing them within. We need to connect more because there's a problem here. Whereas the more established community now is more like remove the problem so everybody can benefit. Do you have any thoughts on how we got so far apart on those concepts?
I will say there's a lot of internal conflict, I would say within myself, but also within our community because of what you're describing, because we are still a part of this mainstream society. So that still is, which is right type of thing. And what do we do? And there's a little bit of both that happens sometimes, of course, because we're not like our own self-governance. We've talked about that with other like federally recognized tribes and some differences there.
People within the same society can develop such different ideas about how healing happens or how problems need to be addressed. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts on how those two got so far apart, Like why does one side say, nope, send them away and you got to punish them, right? Because I think the problem people have with the concept of restorative justice is they often feel like the problem or the criminal or the perpetrator gets let off the hook, right? He didn't go do hard time. He got community service. Whereas the restorative justice mindset would say, no, he took from the community. So now he's contributing to the community as a way of kind of restoring that balance. So I just didn't know if you had any thoughts, because you've lived in both worlds, how we got so far apart about how we handle this, Like why does one side want to bring the hammer and the other wants to bring the healing, And if you had some thoughts there.
The short answer in my mind is historical trauma. And of course, just like colonization. And that is how this started, was through violence and those types of things, that division. It's like some people have now recognized, like, no, this is actually a better way of doing things. But then we're still trying to undo, like it's like a unlearning, I feel like.
So when you say that, because those are some other terms I mean, you're giving me such an education here. Like you're right in line with all the things I see in the news, and I want to understand better. But so when you say like historical trauma and you say colonization, things like that, whether it be personally or with your clients, what are the impacts of that you're seeing or feeling day in and day out? Like how is that still with us?
So definitely with Native American populations, with myself and my clients, I see just like this continued erasure in different ways, more covert ways. Like, of course, we know genocide, that's, overt erasure of a population. But now it's more like where you were saying, like, you're not hearing about the Native Americans or they're not included in the data because the number was so small, we're just going to put them as something else. That was what was on
Other.
CNN.
So, was it really something else? They labeled it as something else?
And people start to internalize that. I mean, you're, especially when you're walking through the world daily, explaining who you are and why you sound like you do or why you look like you do, and then you don't really see yourself represented. You're not hearing about positive data or resilience at all. Um, And I shouldn't say at all because I do hear about it now and there is, but even with, I think about other populations and even maybe my Black or African American clients and just the microaggressions and just the re-traumatization, like seeing you spoke about seeing stuff in the media. And so, on social media, and there's videos of people dying that look like you or being killed by police. And those things are re-traumatizing, like that secondary and vicarious trauma all day.
Yeah. So if I hear you right, it's just sort of consistent messages that you're not welcome or you're not part of.
Yeah, that you're not enough, you don't belong, or you don't even exist.
I think the people who push back on that, they like to say things like, well, that was X amount of years ago, right? That was hundreds of years ago. And there's almost like an implied message of like, get over it, that's kind of in there. Like, well, I understand that your grandfather's grandfather, but teach at a major university, you are there, you have opportunity, you know what I mean? So it almost becomes a situation where like your success gets used against the feelings that you're having, and there's like a weird balance there. And so, I mean, have you encountered that or felt that? Like, is that still very alive and well for you today, or is that something that you've like processed?
Definitely processed, but definitely there's some days where, that are not as great. You made me think about an example. When I was in my internship about to start grad school, the only feedback I received was about the way I speak. And so at that time, I was probably about 20, 21. And so I'm trying to do a good job. I'm in an internship. This might turn into a job. So I took that feedback and I was like, what can I do to kind of, show that I make an effort towards this one thing? And there was a seminar on campus. I went to East Carolina University about language. And so I said, I'm going to go to this seminar based on, the feedback you gave me on my review. And basically, at the seminar, they were empowering the way I speak and saying, this shows dialect based on where you're from. This is part of who you are. This is identity. And at the time, I was told like, you don't speak the way you write. You write very professionally. And I'm like, nobody really speaks the way they write. And so it's so funny now because around that time, I wouldn't even speak up in class. In undergrad, my participation was very minimal because I just didn't want the attention. I didn't want to get asked questions. And I also, sometimes people are like, what did you say? Just because they're so surprised when I open my mouth. So that was something that now I look back and I'm like, that was a microaggression. And that kind of shaped me. And luckily, after grad school and after getting out of that space, I had people. The first person I remember was a Black male, and he wanted me to present. He's like, you need to be sharing this information, all of this information you have. We're in a higher ed setting. And he's like, you need to do workshops. You need to be teaching people. You have all this information on accessibility and mental health that all of our instructors and advisors need. And I'm like, the biggest fear of my life is to be, standing in front of people speaking. And I was watching a sermon one day, and it was Michael Todd from Transformation Church. And he said, that one thing that you're most scared of and that you don't want to do the most, that's your gift. And I was like, dang it.
Yeah.
I have to start talking. I have to start talking to people. So that is what transpired me into this place of trainings and education and educating folks. So now I consider myself a psychotherapist educator because I have that micro one-on-one, but then also I really want to hit more, you not hit. I don't want to be violent, but I
Yeah.
really want to touch more folks, and
Yeah.
more reach and impact that upstream.
Yeah, well, thank God you had that experience because you have so much to offer. And I'm imagining the younger version of you with those things to share, but just almost feeling like you don't have permission or feeling like it'll be more trouble than it's worth because here comes, the avalanche of questions or, the judgment. I mean, the actual open judgment, like write, talk like you write. That's what's implied in that. It's so funny. It's such a backhanded compliment. Like, you write so well. Why can't you talk like you write? That implies you don't talk so well. You know what I mean? It's like, thank you for that feedback, and that's tough. And, but it's interesting the concept you said about what you most want is on the other side of your greatest fears. We talk a lot about the, in all the old stories, there's a dragon, but behind the dragon is the gold, right? And there's something that we can learn from that because you have to go through the difficult things to get to the thing that you really want. And oftentimes what you most want is behind the thing you least want to do, And I think that that's part of why we're put here to learn and evolve and to deal with those difficulties. So I see the sigh of relief. Are you remembering some dragons that you had to slay along the way, or?
Yeah, and they keep coming, and I'm so glad that I have a growth mindset and that I really try to take, of course, my ego and my feelings might be a little bruised at first, but I do try to take these things and see how I can apply it to further my purpose. Even with, like, my personal life and hardships I go through, so many times I've end up with a client later who has not the exact same situation, but enough similar enough that I can understand the emotions that they're describing to me and help them dive deeper into processing those emotions and get into a positive, outcome from that adversity they're dealing with. So that's been super helpful for me to kind of transmute those hardships into purpose.
It's beautiful, into purpose. Yeah, yeah. And you talk about working upstream because that's something I ran into in my career too. Is you can only see so many clients, right? So when you get into like a building mindset, or you build agencies, or you get into education, I taught for a little while as well. You're sort of planting seeds of growth for future generations, and for and you're multiplying your impact, right? Because if you work really really hard and 50, you see 50 clients in a week. Okay, but what if you build a program that sees 500 clients in a week or 1,000 clients a week? Now look how your impact has spread. So that's amazing that you did that. It's so funny. I think back to somebody who was told, to speak differently, and now you teach at a very prestigious university, and it's a beautiful story. I hope you're proud of that. Sometimes when you're not working hard and slaying dragons, I hope you take a moment to feel some pride in that, because I think about all the people who couldn't overcome that feedback and got lost along the way.
I appreciate that, and I think talking to you is giving me that moment of pause now to think about, yeah, how far I've come, and I don't just do it for me, and I know that's a cultural thing too, is I do it so people like me can see me doing it and can know that they can do it too. It's not gonna be easy, and I'll tell them that all day, but I will get them connected to the resources as well to help them as much, and that a fail is not a fail. A fail is just a new route. You can, just take that information, and that's the hardest part is kind of, processing through those feelings and taking the information from the experience to move forward.
Well, you become that place of representation that you didn't have to look to when you were younger, right? And so, in the simplest of terms, like, we can complain all day about what's not there, or we can get busy on building what needs to be there, right? And so you can be part of the solution, or you can be part of the problem in that way, which is a hard thing to say, right? Because plenty of white guys in movies, TVs, shows everywhere that I saw. So I definitely didn't have that problem. But I wonder, I like to think that if I was in that situation, I could get into that growth mindset and say, okay, I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to be the change I want to see in the world. Before we go on, I want to say a few words about Anew behavioral health. Anew Behavioral Health is an outpatient provider of mental health and substance abuse services in Ohio and New Hampshire. That means that Anew can successfully treat mental health and substance abuse issues or dual diagnosis if you're struggling with both. Their integrated approach allows for them to successfully address issues related to anxiety, depression, addiction, trauma, and really anything that stands between your life and the life you could be living. You really cannot bring them an issue that they have not successfully treated. They have also solved one of the biggest problems for people seeking help. They have a dedicated team waiting to hear from you at helpnow@anewbh.com. If you contact them today, within 24 hours, you will have heard back from, wait for this, a real live person, and will also have your first appointment scheduled at that time. So how do you contact them? Well, if you're in Ohio or New Hampshire, you're probably close to one of their local locations. You're welcome to go in. If not, you can always reach them online at anewbh.com. And if you're interested in services for you or loved one, use that address, helpnow@anewbh.com. When you're working with clients, so one of the things we kind of commit to here is no problems without solutions. So we're talking about some challenges here. What are the solutions? So when we have a client that comes in or a student and they're struggling with these types of issues or it is affecting them, like how does your work to change that? Like what are some techniques that you use or how do you approach that with them to bring about change in their life?
So I think folks deal with a lot of imposter syndrome. And so I do think that CBT tends to help with that, the negative self-talk and the feeling like you're not good enough, but also connecting to other like-minded folks, like whether it's a mentor or whether it's, a peer group somewhere that you can feel connected and validated and just be and not necessarily have to do to be accepted. That's my favorite thing to keep in mind for my own self-care because I do so much that thinking about who can I be around where I can just be, and they don't expect me to do anything, and I can show up with all my imperfections, and they're gonna see those as, gifts and think they're funny or think they're, entertaining or make them feel safer to be themselves. So, yeah, I really have tried to move, especially this year, rest has been one of my, words of the year, and so getting less into that doing and more into that being and that acceptance of all parts of self.
So when people are doers and they don't feel comfortable just being, do we see anxiety develop around that? Do we see self-esteem issues develop around that? I would have to think that constant message to yourself of I'm not enough or I need to be different would have to be pretty exhausting in a variety of ways. So what symptoms do you see that might point to that as being the core problem?
Yeah, absolutely. Some depressive symptoms, even like irritability and hypervigilance for me, is definitely irritability. And I can see that culturally in the fact that feelings or emotions, it was not safe to have those.
Okay.
You may die in the history of the world if you showed any emotion other than anger. And so I think that is how I feel is that's why when I'm feeling sad, when I'm feeling disconnected, disappointed, it shows up as irritability or anger, and I have to take that, notice that that's a secondary emotion, and dig a little deeper into what is the real feeling here, and what is it rooted in, and what needs are going unmet, so that I can then start to shift things around in terms of what I need to support myself.
Yeah, anger is so tricky because I work with a lot of kids and kids don't have a lot of power. They don't have a lot of resources. They're dependent, by definition. And so anger, especially if they've been abused or traumatized or shown anger and violence from others, anger can be the only time that they feel strong and that they can feel powerful. But it's actually the thing that's going to make you the least powerful long term, right? You're losing control. It's going to lead to consequences. And as whenever that masking emotion of anger is in place, you're getting no opportunities to deal with the real issues behind it, whether it be grief and sorrow or depression or anxiety and things like that. So that's a tricky one. That's a tough one to deal with. And I've seen it in kids, but I never thought about it, in different populations like that. I never knew that was something that showed up more often for you.
Yeah, I think, shame is a big thing too, and that, ties into that depression. And even physical symptoms like headaches, muscle aches, fatigue. It's just so intersectional.
I was gonna say you get those adrenal glands pumping and that cortisol flowing through your veins. Because I mean, anger, it's fight or flight. I mean, you're preparing for battle literally, and to gear up and do that multiple times per day, that exhaustion, I can connect with that for sure. So that's interesting. So I did want to make some time, and we've got time, but I think this is a good transition to talk about the mental health first aid that we were talking about, because I'm guessing that a lot of your work, especially with these issues, so they're carrying in big issues. Like we can't go back in time and let them not have those experiences. We can't undo that damage, but they're going to need tools. They're going to need. So what do I do with it? And that's always been my favorite thing about therapy, and also my biggest beef with therapy is sort of like you can talk about it all day long. You can talk about it for years, right? Like Freud can put you on the couch for 2 years. You can figure out it's your mom's fault, and after that 2 years, you're going to go, okay, what do I do about it, right? So I want to allow time for proper processing, but I also want to move to that action step, efficiently, and have some tools and things that people can actually apply in their daily life. So educate me on this mental health first aid and how that's been helpful for you.
Absolutely. I love your question because that is kind of the process. And I tell folks with that self-awareness, if you just stay there, you're going to be depressed as hell because like you're just sitting here knowing all the crap and not, changing it. So yes, the next step is the action. With mental health first aid, it's designed to be like first aid or CPR physical courses, but for mental health and substance use. So there's different segments that focus on early signs and symptoms, worsening signs and symptoms, and even crisis situations. So I encourage people to think about themselves as they're going through the training, but also thinking about other people, because self-care, we start with self-care and we end with self-care when it comes to the training, but also like other people that they can support. That's the primary purpose for the training, is recognizing these things and then also knowing what resources are available and what to suggest, whether it's to yourself or whether it's to somebody else. If I'm feeling disconnected, then a hobby, if I wanted to engage in a self-care or a self-help resource, a hobby might be a good way to go, or a peer group, or even, getting athletic or exercising with a group of people. And so I think it's so tricky because it's not like, okay, do 10 chest compressions and then the EMS will show up. It's like such a gray area. We have to use our critical thinking and problem solving skills when we encounter somebody who is having these symptoms. Maybe they're withdrawing, or maybe they're not, getting things done like they used to, or problems with focus and concentration. We could notice that and say, "Hey, I've observed such and such. Is everything okay? What have you been doing for yourself? And have you ever thought of this?"
Yeah. Yeah.
And hopefully create that culture of care where it's like, this is being normalized. We're destigmatizing these experiences of depression, of anxiety.
Do you feel that a lot? I mean, because it's funny, my generation, we never talked about anything mental health, right? Depression and anxiety and trauma, those all were thrown under the label of crazy, right? Those crazy people are struggling from that. And so when we first started the conversation around destigmatizing mental health and talking about it, it was like a whole new world kind of opened up. And that's what got my attention and brought me into this field, actually, in a lot of ways, because I had names for all the things that I had been seeing when I was growing up, right? So maybe people aren't crazy. Maybe they're struggling in a variety of ways. Maybe they're not inherently flawed. Maybe this is poor coping skills. But it feels like now this generation, it's part of the vernacular. Like they know the words and they, it's almost sometimes feels like it's gone too far the other direction. So do you see that in your work? I mean, are we still struggling with the stigma, and maybe in your population as well? Is there a resistance to mental health concepts that you're still dealing with? Or have we not fixed, because you don't like using that word, but have we made enough progress there? Or is there still work to be done, you think?
I think there's definitely still work to be done. We have destigmatized in some ways, and I do hear, like, I work with a lot of like early adolescents and young adults, and so they know the terms, and I do agree. Sometimes they're using the term in a not necessarily appropriate way. So I've talked about frequently in my trainings how, like with my grandparents or my mom, even, I might say, have you talked to your doctor about that? Even if it's a mental health concern. Where with my friends, we talk about what we told our therapist last week or what our therapist told us. And so the conversation has been a lot more normalized, but I still see a divide within my age group where and it is more cultural, the divide that I'm noticing, and it's folks from those places with less access. Like I see a very clear difference from where I live in Durham versus where I did live in Buckhead, and the stigma related to mental health.
I will agree with you there. So we do a lot of work in Ohio, and same concept. So around Cleveland, Cincinnati, Dayton, Columbus, different experience, different conversations than Portsmouth, Ohio, or Mount Vernon, Ohio, or some of the more rural areas for sure. I don't want to say behind, but it just feels like the education is catching up, to where it has been in those other areas. Um, and I love how you talked about mental health as kind of an ongoing practice too, that it's not intervention based. You're trying to get out in front of this by identifying signs and symptoms and coming up with new things that you can try. It's sort of like physical workouts, right? A mental workout is just like a physical workout. It's like, well, you go to the gym every day. It's a contribution to your physical health. You should be doing things on a daily basis to contribute to your mental health as well. I did want to dig in a little bit more to those signs and symptoms, because I think our listeners as well, or especially, there's that line of, and I've talked about this before, we're like, is it bad enough for me to go get help, right? Like they're sort of sitting and waiting on their mental health to get bad enough or to cause enough problems that now it's serious enough, I should get a therapist or I should get a psychiatrist. But what are some of those early warning signs, and maybe even to intermediate warning signs that are before the crisis, that you think people should be on alert for, that kind of say, hey, there's something developing here?
So, of course, they're unique to each individual, but I will say in general, and more fatigue, and thinking about these symptoms over a 2-week period or more. And sometimes, yeah, there's valid reason why you're more tired because of whatever you got going on. Okay, give yourself some space. But I definitely think physically, the fatigue, the muscle aches, the headaches, the neck tension, sometimes even gastrointestinal changes, um, but then when we think more about behaviorally, more of the like irritability or the withdrawal or sleeping more or less, eating more or less, like trying to think, even like we think about absenteeism and presenteeism. So, like, you're not showing up for commitments, or you are showing up, but physically you're there, but mentally you're kinda like, people are like, "Are you here with us?" So, like,
Yeah.
more of that presenteeism, sometimes not finding joy in things you used to enjoy, like hobbies or even work or socializing.
Bold of you to assume that people are joyful at work to begin with, right? I mean, that's
Oh, I know, right? That's why I said, or even worse.
No, but I mean, you said the key word earlier in this conversation. You said purpose. I mean, work can be very joyful if you're connected to a sense of purpose. So I do think, all jokes aside, that is a warning sign that maybe you're not depressed, but maybe you need to reevaluate some of those choices. If you're not feeling a sense of purpose, what are you doing it for?
And absolutely, those are some of those warning signs for suicide when you're thinking about no sense of purpose, no reason for living, or looking for a way out or an escape. Those are some things that folks would want to be especially aware of.
I always use this phrase of deviation from the norm, right? Like everybody's their own expert. You know you better than I'll ever know you. Even if I live with you, you'll know you better than I'll ever know you. So monitoring your internal states and sort of knowing what your baseline is, and then, like you said, over a 2 to 3 week period, if you've deviated in either direction, I mean, manic and euphoria are symptoms as well, right? And if that deviation is in place, then it's time to get checked out and to get some help. One of the things I thought about when I was listening to you talk was monitoring a lot of physical symptoms. But you're a therapist, you're a counselor, and we talk about the power of talk therapy in the work. There's a lot of practitioners that I've met recently, and there seems to be a surge of people who want to work on the somatic side and want to work on physical health. And, you see a lot of like sauna work or cold plunges or, cranking up your workouts or breath work or grounding and meditation, things like that. What is your opinion or stance on kind of the value of traditional talk therapy, traditional methods versus that somatic work and how they work together? Like, are you a fan of that? Do you think that can be a shortcut, or how do you conceptualize that?
I am a fan of holistic methods. So I think that you should do any and everything that works for you. And there may be some people that works better for them than talk therapy. And so I would 100% support that they go that route. Also, I don't feel like you should just choose one thing. Like, I recently ordered this shirt that was like, I have God and a therapist. Like, some people don't believe in a higher power, but those who do at times will be like, I just need to pray more. I don't, need to go to therapy. Or I even have family members who are like, oh, I just talked to my best friend, or I talked to my sibling, and that's my therapy. Yeah, that's part of your support system, and you can add therapy on for more self-directed change and accountability. And I mean, coaching can even do some of that too if it doesn't need to be so treatment oriented. But yeah, I think that early intervention is key because if we think about a physical health problem, if I broke my ankle, like, I'm not gonna wait and see how bad it gets before I go to the doctor, because that could lead to permanent damage. I'm gonna go ahead and, get assessed, get a treatment plan, which might include medication, it might include physical therapy, and that is normal. And so I want people to see mental health the same way. And just this week, I called to get a new therapist. I'm not having a major crisis or anything, but I know I'm going through some changes in my life and I want support in that adjustment.
Well, and you're going to come on the probably the best mental health podcast going. So you're probably a little nervous and anxious about that. So, I mean, it can be a super
Yeah, it's a big deal.
No, but I love that there's elements of you practicing what you preach, showing up in what you're talking about. You're talking about you're a therapist. You're talking about connecting with community and church and God. I mean, so it really is great when people are walking the walk as well as talking the talk. I think that authenticity is the number one thing. You have to be real and setting a real example. Let me ask you this. So what do you think is next? So you're on the forefront here with you're teaching, you're obviously in private practice as well. Ascend. We'll give some shout outs there. And I'm sure that's going well. You're doing the mental health first aid and you're dealing with these issues that are, trauma-based and historical trauma, things like that. So you have a neat vantage point on the field, that you're in the work, but you're in the education. You're also having personal experiences. So as this field develops, what do you think are going to be the next things that we have to get ready for, or the things that we have to prepare for? Like when we talk about there's still more work to be done, what do you see as the next steps in that work as we try to help as many people as we can?
So you talked about access earlier, and so of course I think that is still important. However, when it comes to historically marginalized populations, even if we sat this unit in their community and they have access, they could walk to the place. They may still not access those services without reducing the stigma and shame around using the services. And so to me, I think that is the vantage point. Like that is where I would want to direct my focus, which is why I love mental health first aid so much, is it really helps to destigmatize. We recently had got some data back at UNC about just the stigma and how that increases secrecy and it increases feelings of guilt and shame. And then that all is going to exacerbate these mental health symptoms. So to me, addressing that stigma and also that reduces that blame, because I do feel like a lot of historically traumatized and marginalized groups get blamed for their symptoms at times, even within our own communities. So, for example, like we might call each other lazy, but physically, you've been doing physical labor. I'm just thinking about like the males in my
Of course,
community.
yeah.
A lot of them do physical labor work. And so that's physically exhausting. But also think about battling depression in the middle of trying to provide for your family. And I've witnessed this. Um, and then you're getting called lazy or just you need to get up and go to work, like type of thing when it's rooted in a mental health issue. And that's not super unique to, any one population. I think that shows stigma, but also when we're going to providers who are not aware of how like that historical trauma is rooted in our DNA and certain things that happen or that we just do by default is a root of that. And instead of blaming the client, thinking about where did this originate and what do you want to do with that information?
Yeah, I think that where I do agree, I see that, and where I've had that experience has been some of the labels that I think they get put on people and clients, and I think educating on how people communicate and how they tend to express themselves or choose to express themselves, because I've certainly seen. Clients from different marginalized backgrounds or minority backgrounds get labeled as, say, difficult or combative or rude. And when they're sort of confronted with that feedback, it's like, I'm just trying to express to you how I'm feeling about the situation. And it comes across, right? Like, because of those cultural differences, it's like, well, and then it takes me back to your story of like, almost like, well, yeah, but this is how we're supposed to talk about this. Like, we got to remove that idea of how we're supposed to express and talk about those things, because I think it's shutting some people out. Because imagine being that person getting that feedback, and your story is remarkable because you pushed through it and found a way to overcome that. Somebody who's vulnerable mentally or is struggling with an addiction issue or has gotten that feedback in different areas, they may never come back into the practice ever again. They may never give another therapist anywhere a chance ever again because they made me feel like I was doing it wrong or something like that. It's such a struggle because I just don't know how we create that awareness within the field that all of those avenues for communication are available to everyone. I just think people are who they are and they bring their background to every situation, and it's, practice by practice, it's tough because you may run into somebody even on a provider side who hasn't had those experiences and may not be receptive to that type of communication. So, where I think it's also valuable to coach clients to, like, you can shop around. you can change therapists. You can find where you fit. And there are places that will be accepting and can help you. And it doesn't mean one's good or bad. It just means you're a better fit and they're a better fit for you as a helper. So I think that's a key piece as well.
I try to make like comparisons to like a job or even a relationship. Like you don't ever work, you don't stop ever working again because you had a job that wasn't a good fit. You're going to go find a new job that you like better.
That's good. The relationship thing too, right? You don't break up and then just stop, right?
And never date again most of the time, even if you say that.
Yeah.
Joking.
Yeah. You might check their socials for a couple weeks or maybe months, but you're still going to get back out there eventually, right? So that's great. That's great. Tell me a little bit more too about, and we haven't spent much time on this, but I want to hear more about your practice and what the goal of your practice is. I heard you say you're located in Durham right now. So tell me what inspired you to start Ascend and what the mission is there and how that's working for you.
Yeah, I started it in September of 2020, so right in the middle of the pandemic. That was a good bit of my motivation is I was seeing how it was impacting the students I was working with at Carolina, and I knew how it was impacting my community, and I felt like, okay, I'm working from home. This is a good time to start with teletherapy so that it doesn't feel so pulled in different locations. So I offer teletherapy in the state of North Carolina, and I'm also looking to expand to South Carolina very soon. So that is rolling, that is going, and I'm taking clients as I can there. I also offer coaching, so wellness coaching if folks, are not at that clinical level, don't necessarily have a diagnosis, but would just want more support and accountability and just goal-directed change. And then I offer educational services. And to me, that when you were asking like, where do you go next? What's next for you? That is one of the things that I have started to beef up a little more. And that is more of my focus going forward because the other things are kind of working the way they're supposed to work. And so doing more education around racial trauma and even around ways to use R or Native American and R types of healing practices within treatment. Those are types of education that I plan to be offering. And I love working with different corporations. So I'm hoping to work more in that sector where I can reach people who may not be thinking about mental health and even like mental health in the workplace or diversity in the workplace as it relates. I know I'm kind of a unicorn in that way where I'm going to be talking about both no matter which one we get pulled to talk about. But the intersection of identity has been an amazing topic to use with corporations like Red Hat and just offering the group the opportunity to think about their own identities, how those intersect and how they intersect with other people and how it's kind of shapes their life and their lens on other people's lives.
Yeah. So same question I asked before. Can you give me a little 101 on that? Because intersectionality is like another one of those. I mean, like I said, Alicia, you're nailing every one of the terms. I mean, it's like you can definitely tell you're living in that world. So, kind of a beginner's understanding of intersectionality and how that affects. I know you're talking about the workplace, so maybe you can talk from that context or that lens. But, what is that and why is that important to focus on?
Well, it is really like all of the identities we carry. Like I've told you so far, I identify as Native American and a woman. I've talked about God, so obviously I identify as, believing in a higher power, as a Christian. And all of those shape the way I view things. They also shape how I live my life and my value system. And so that is so important in understanding yourself, but also understanding other people. Because a lot of times your values come from those identities. And so some of the reflection questions I tend to ask people in these sessions is what identity do you think about the most? And a lot of times it's that identity that's probably the most marginalized. Like, I work with folks with disabilities, and they might say their ADHD or their autism is the first identity that they think about, because that is the main lens that's shaping how they're received by other people and how they're treated.
Yeah, and I think it's probably going to be, the challenge there is if you're in a larger corporation, the number of intersections, I guess if I'm using that term right, are going to be very high, very fast, right? So if you're in a small practice with 3 people who are a lot like you're going to connect on most of that, right? But if you're all those permutations, if you have 4 to 5 different intersections or identities that inform per person, you've got 1,000 people. How do those cross over? So do you have any general advice for companies or larger groups on how they can not only be respectful of that, but use that awareness to enhance, their work and to enhance their work environment?
Yeah, they can set up a session with me.
Perfect, man. I lobbed it right in there and boom, she knocked it right out of the park. So, yeah.
I am a softball player,
Oh,
so
perfect.
but no, seriously, I do have activities that I like to do with people. I prefer more of the communicative type where we can kinda sit and share, explore ourselves, but share that with other people, and you get a different perspective, and you're thinking about, "Oh, I didn't even think about that about me." Then you hear how somebody else, maybe it's the same exact identity, but it's how it has shaped, like, I'm an only child, that's another identity I have, and so somebody else might be an only child. I had a single parent, they had 2 parents. How did that change our experience of that?
Yeah, perfect.
And just really building, I think that work builds community in these, larger organizations, because we develop empathy and understanding for differences.
So we're getting close on time. We talked about time being our most valuable asset, so I want to be respectful of yours. But we do try to stay solution focused and positively focused. And so I want to leave with this: in your experiences with these, dealing with the historical trauma and dealing with intersectionality and dealing with identity work. I mean, there is a lot of work to be done, and there's a lot of challenges. But since you entered the field, or since you first became interested till now, where are you seeing progress? Like, what are we getting right so far that we can build on?
I think definitely the representation and the advertisement, and I'm seeing a lot of judgment removed in the specific communities. I'm also seeing other communities who want to prioritize this business because of the identity. Like, we're able to live more authentically because people are like, "Oh, this is a Black-owned business. I might pay a little bit more for this, because it is," or, "This was handmade by a Native American artist. I want to have this piece in my home to support that thing." And so I really think that being able to live authentically and having people who are valuing those identities, and that is where I'm starting to see some progress in that way, is like people really just showing up as who you are and allowing, like, the folks that like that to gravitate, and the folks that wanna support that to gravitate.
So you're seeing more people who can just be and don't have to do all the time. You're feeling that.
Yes, and even what they do is part of who they are. They are choosing to do things that really connect with their identity and their purpose, and being celebrated for that. But like you said before, that can be hard to overcome to get there, but I think it's so worth it. That is the goal in my mind.
Well, and I'm glad that we're seeing that more from you. Hearing your stories, it sounds like, you're able to be more of who you are, and that authenticity is probably really transmitting to your clients and students and helping them. You are that representative that you wish you had. And my advice for you is, I hope you can learn how to write like you talk, because I think you talk great. So you tell whoever that was. I think the exact opposite. I think if you could write like you talk, we could really have something here. So, Alicia, how do people find you when they want to, like, you brought up accessing your services. You have a lot of ways you can help people. How do they find you?
Absolutely. So you can find me on social media, on Instagram at Ascend with Alicia. And there's also a website link on there, which will take you to Ascend Counseling, PLLC.org. And I'm also on Facebook at Ascend with Alicia.
My producer, Leo, is gesturing at me because I don't know how the internet works, but you'll find all those down here, apparently, I guess. We're going to have those listed for you. So, Alicia, just thank you so much. It was an honor to have you. I appreciate the time. I hope that you got something out of this time as well. But I just think that this was great. And I thank you for sharing all that you shared today. This was awesome.
Yes, I absolutely got so much out of this. I expected to because I showed my cousin who I was doing a podcast with today, and he was like, "What? I listened to him. I listened to his YouTube," and he was like, "I know that guy."
That's cool. That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, so that really excited me already, and we had already, I feel like we connect on a lot of things.
Definitely.
And I have just enjoyed my time with you all today, and I appreciate everything that you're doing for mental health awareness and healing our community and our nation.
That's right. We need it. We need to come together. All this stuff that's pulling us apart, we need to come together. And we've got, to hammer it home. If a Duke guy, and what's that college you teach at again? I forgot the name. What?
And a Carolina girl and get this going, then y'all can.
That's right.
Too.
If we can get along for an hour, y'all can pull this off. It's not, if we can overcome that, anything can be overcome. So thank you. And I know you got a lot of cousins, so pass the link around. We'd be happy to have them all. I'm so glad for that. So I do want to take a moment as we part here, though, and give a shout out to our sponsors. So, like what Alicia was talking about today, the mental health first aid. I know we talked a lot about historical trauma and some of the larger issues, but day in and day out, you've got to live your life, and you've got to live your life with a sense of purpose and in a way that feels good to you and feels healthy. If that's just not feeling that way, and you're not in North Carolina where you would access Alicia services, if you're in Ohio or New Hampshire, Anew Behavioral Health is standing by with, psychiatrists, nurses, therapists, case managers, mental health workers, substance abuse workers. Really a great agency, believes in individualized care, and that's a key point. Integrated services are awesome. It's like a buffet. You can combine whatever works for you and leave the rest for everybody else. But in Anew, they're fully committed. They're run by clinicians. They were established by clinicians, and so they have a heart for service, and they will put together an individualized plan for you. There's no have to. It's only about what's going to help you in your situation. So those links are down below too as well, but you can find them at anewbh.com, or you can connect with them directly at helpnow@anewbh.com. So before we go, one final round of thanks. Producer Leo is here. Thank you so much, sir, for making us look great and keeping me on track. And thank you so much, Alicia, for your time. I appreciate having you.
Thank you.
All right. Until next time, guys, take care of yourself. Take care of each other. Thanks. Hey guys, although Through Help and Back is an excellent podcast with a lot of great ideas, I do want to let you know that in no way is Through Help and Back expected to be perceived as or relied upon in any way as specific medical advice or mental health advice for you personally. The information provided through Help and Back on our website or our podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment that can be provided by your own providers. Do not use our content in lieu of professional advice given by qualified medical professionals, and do not disregard professional medical advice or delay seeking professional advice because of the information you have read on our website, heard on our podcast, or otherwise received from us. Although we love discussing issues related to healthcare, mental health, and addiction, we are not providing direct healthcare, mental health care, medical, or nutrition therapy services. We're not attempting to diagnose, treat, prevent, or cure in any manner whatsoever any physical or psychological ailment, any mental or emotional issue, disease, or condition. We are not giving you specific medical, psychological, or religious advice whatsoever. Please take care of yourself and take care of others as you always seek the advice of your own medical providers and your own mental health providers regarding any questions or concerns you have about your specific health, or before implementing any recommendations or suggestions from us. These are ideas that have worked for other people. We think it's important to share them. We do not guarantee that they will work for you specifically. Do not stop taking any medications without speaking to your physician. nurse practitioner, physician assistant, mental health provider, or any other healthcare or medical professional. And if you have or suspect that you have a medical or mental health issue, contact your own healthcare provider promptly. Also, one last thing, if you know or suspect that you are currently experiencing a crisis, it is absolutely imperative that you seek the advice of your doctor or other emergency healthcare services prior to ever thinking about using our content. We love the conversations. We're glad you're stopping by. We hope you take a lot from the content. But again, for your specific individual medical situation, please always seek quality personal care from your own providers. Do not let this information or this advice stand on its own. Thanks so much for listening.